People who were in a coma. What change surprised you when you woke up? I was in a coma for close to 6 weeks. When I woke up, I had to learn everything again. I had most of my speech abilities, but my motor control was horrid. I had to figure out how to wipe my ass as well as walk up and down the stairs again. That took about 3 weeks. I had lost a shit ton of weight too. I was 6'3" and weighed about 145 pounds. I was in a coma for a month and the doctor told me, "You're the first person I've ever seen gain weight in a coma." I gained 10 pounds and had stretch marks on my hips. My nephew, 14, was in a medically induced coma for over 3 months. During that time, he had lost about 30% of his body weight as his muscles atrophied. The first remark upon seeing himself for the first time was, "Did you forget to feed me?" Which was incredibly hard to hear since his family had sat crying at his bedside every moment he was unconscious. I gotta give your nephew points. He chose some good words for his re-entry. I was in a coma for 4 days from bacterial meningitis. When I woke up, I was completely deaf. I had to communicate with my parents and doctors with a notepad and pen. Some hearing gradually returned in my left ear, but the right ear is still 100% deaf to this day. A good friend of our family went into a coma for half a year. Finally, when he woke up, he was stunned why his wife looked so old. He actually lost the last 15 years of his memory. He knew he had 2 children, but they were babies, and he didn't know about his 3rd child. And the memory never came back. He skipped from no mobile phones to smartphones to laptops. Everything was so new to him. Being stuck in the early 90s, but actually being in the 2000s, there were a lot of changes to handle. But learning you missed all your children growing up was the hardest for him. At least he knew who his wife was. If they had met after his memory line, he wouldn't know anything about her. About 20 years ago, my cousin had a severe head injury from a fall. He was about 20 at the time. He was in a coma for almost 4 weeks. When he woke up, he fairly quickly discovered that his memory was eidetic. He could repeat entire conversations back word for word and even tell you the date and time you said something. Also, he could memorize images with just a few seconds glance. His memory is still eidetic today. It's annoying as fuck. Whenever he reminds me of something I said in the past, usually I can't even remember, I suggest that we hit him in the head again. I've read an interview with a person that also has an eidetic memory. They stated it can be quite a burden because uncomfortable or sad memories stay strong as well. My wife was in a medically induced coma for 4 days. She had a reaction to contrast dye and her heart stopped for 20 minutes. For nearly 3 months, she was confabulating about her long-dead parents. She would speak about them like they were in the next room, or she would say her daughter or brother called. But they hadn't. Over and over, she thought her mom was alive, then her dad. Drove me crazy having to gently correct her many times per day. She would come up with amazing tales about what people, relatives, friends, neighbors were doing, what they did. Truly creative fiction. 3 months later, she began to come back. The confabulation stopped. Now things are reversed. She can remember recent events, but her long-term memories are gone. I don't know what that's like, but it must be awful. She cries sometimes for her lost memories, but overall she's doing very well. My wife was in a coma, 2 weeks medically induced. When she woke, she had very wrong memories. They were all based on conversations people had while in the room with her. For example, she thought they flew her to Washington, D.C. for treatment. While she was in a coma, my father-in-law mentioned how he just flew back in town from D.C. on a work trip. Somehow she overheard this while out and her brain interpreted it to mean she flew to D.C. Even after we explained to her the reality of where she was, it took days for her to come to terms with reality. Edit. She was in a coma about 10 years ago. She's not currently in a coma. My brother-in-law had a brain tumor, so he was out for a while when he first was brought to the hospital. The nurses happened to be of Asian descent, so when he was awake, he kept apologizing to people for making them have to come to Japan to see him. A guy I dated for a few weeks in high school was standing at a bus stop when I was driving back to my old hometown to visit my parents. I waved at him and he just looked bewildered. So I messaged him on Facebook just to be nice. It turns out that he had no idea who I was because he'd been in an accident and nearly half-year coma. He somehow woke up with a Scottish accent and had to relearn to walk. His family finally figured out that the Scottish accent was because his ultra-Scottish grandma was with him a lot as a baby, and I guess that's what his brain latched onto. He's now a happy Ren Fair performer who used to be a very troubled guy headed for military service. I guess he's happier, but it really makes you wonder who he would have become. He also kept asking me if he knew why he wore this specific ring. Unfortunately, I don't. My stepdad was in a coma/ICU for about 3 weeks. Woke up, he couldn't find his teeth. We looked for a week, completely forgot where we put him. Then he dropped dead at the bathroom sink in the hospital. Out of nowhere, they revived him. Couldn't figure out why he could barely breathe. The hospital sat us down and showed us the x-rays, with his dentures in his body. They forgot to take them out when they put the tubes in his mouth, blocking his air pipes or whatever. So yeah, we found him though. Edit. Since this is blowing up, I figured I'd post a picture. The only one I have is on my old phone. Hopefully I did get the link right. Here's a pic. My mom was in an induced coma for 3 months. When she woke up, she thought the hospital was trying to kill her. She tried to get out of bed and fell on the floor because she couldn't walk. She was mostly freaked out about how her feet had lost their form. They were humped over from not being used. Every muscle she had to learn again. She couldn't talk well or write at all. She has different handwriting after relearning. She said she hated how perfect her hands looked. Her nails and cuticles were perfect and clean from not being used. I remember trying to brush her hair after she woke up. Almost all of it fell out. She almost died pretty much every day she was in her coma. She had sepsis from a diverculitis surgery gone wrong. A lot of her hair has grown back, and she can walk, but has brain damage that makes her seem very drunk. She's always dizzy, but it's been 5 years now and her recovery has been miraculous. Medically induced for approximately a week due to sepsis. When I was in, I thought I was a bird with my wings outstretched that was slowly freezing to the ground. When I woke up, I thought I was in Taos, but it looked like Raton. I was in Albuquerque in a hospital that I had worked in for years. I thought I was 10 years younger. I thought I had gotten into a wreck and my fiance at the time was an abusive ex-boyfriend. I thought my fiance had found me naked on the side of I-25 and had taken to a veterinary hospital. It took another month and a half for me to understand what happened. I was in and out of surgery and died a couple times on that time. Once they were changing out my wound vac and I looked down and saw inside of me. Then things started making a little more sense. I still can't eat cheeseburgers. Wait, what did cheeseburgers have to do with it? DKA, diabetic ketoacidosis, sent me into a coma. I have vague memories of being sick beforehand, but my overall sense of time was just mush. Even years later, I can't establish a correct timeline. I have flashes of memories of different doctors coming in and out of the room. Once I was out of the coma, I was still pretty out of it. When you're on an insulin drip, they check your sugar every hour. I could never actually sleep, but I felt asleep the whole time. It's a hard feeling to describe, just mushy, runny time. I was in a coma for 9 days. When I woke up, I was still on a ventilator. When they took me off the ventilator, my body didn't remember to breathe on its own. I literally had to relearn how to breathe. Took me a few days. I had no natural sense for how long or how deeply to inhale, how long to hold it, how long to exhale. I had to put all my mental focus towards breathing. It was really weird. For the people wondering how I slept, I didn't. For the first couple days, I dozed off. My blood O2 monitor would start beeping and wake me up. Then a nurse would yell at me from across the ICU to remember to breathe. I couldn't talk because I had the tubes down my nose and throat, but I remember one time I woke up really exhausted to that damn beeping. So I started focusing on breathing again, but I was really angry about it. My nurse came over, yelling at me to breathe. I glared at her and screamed in my non-existent voice, "I am." She must have read my lips and felt rage because she just put her hands up and said, all right, good job," then walked away. Anyways, shared that because I've never had the opportunity to before. My ability to breathe normally was back within a month or so, and my health is good nowadays, so I wouldn't say that it had any permanent effects. I'm now manual breathing, so thanks for that. Back in the 90s, my great-grandfather had a stroke. He was in a coma for 3 weeks, and when I woke up, he couldn't speak English. All he could speak was the Choctaw language. He had learned it when he was a kid, because his family lived right near a Choctaw reserve, and he played with a lot of those kids. He spoke it fluently at the time, but he forgot it over his life to where he couldn't remember any of it by this time. That went on for around 10 days, and then he woke up from a night's sleep and could suddenly speak only English again, not remembering a word of Choctaw. He was also able to repeat verbatim every conversation that had been held in the room that he was in. Was in a coma for 4 days. When I woke up, everyone was talking about the baby boy I had. I had lost my long-term memory and didn't even remember being pregnant. My son was at the children's hospital in the ICU. I delivered him via C-section at 29 weeks. All this was due to me having Crohn's disease, I found out after I woke up. My colon had ruptured during my pregnancy. My husband said I was talking like a child when I first woke up. When I woke, I felt super tired, but the next few days, kinda restless. I remember one conversation my mom had with a nurse while I was under. After a couple of days, I got my long-term memory back and remembered everything up to my second surgery, then nothing until I woke up. My son was my third surgery. I was in a coma after being hit by a car. When I woke up, the man I was seeing decided he would have been way too sad if I had died, so he was my boyfriend from then on. And still is. Note, we had talked about making it official beforehand, but decided that his status in the country was uncertain. We'd leave it open and see how it went. Little late to the party, but after a suicide attempt which led to an overdose, I spent about 2 days in a coma and almost died. While obviously nothing changed in 2 days society-wise, my personality changed heavily, and I don't consider myself the same person as before the coma. I feel like that side of me died and different parts of my brain took over, creating a new personality and control.